It has been noted that Chinese Communist Party or CCP leader Xi Jinping always displays a rather friendly smile when he meets with old friends from the West or new friends who can bring benefits to the CCP, such as when he met with the Governor of California and the Prime Minister of Australia. Over the past 7 to 8 years, the European countries have been quite moderate toward the CCP regime, even as relations between Beijing and their ally, the US, have become increasingly strained. Recently, the Beijing government has made frequent friendly gestures to the European Union. On December 1, 2023, China unilaterally introduced a 2-week visa-free travel policy for France, Germany, Spain, Italy, and the Netherlands. Beijing also lifted sanctions against Lithuania for its proximity to Taiwan. On December 7, 2023, the 24th China-EU summit ended in Beijing without a joint statement. Xi Jinping met with senior EU officials, presidents of the European Council, and the EU Commission. This is relatively rare. In the past, the China-EU leaders meeting, which started in 1998, was co-chaired by China's premier, the presidents of the European Council, and the European Commission. But this time, Xi Jinping had the first talk, and Premier Li Qiang came out in the afternoon, displaying once again Xi's leading style, personally directing and personally involved. We can see that the smile on Xi's face was obviously heavy, and he wasn't as relaxed and confident as he used to be. What kind of change occurred in the relationship between China and Europe? Just before the China-EU summit, there was a flurry of bad news for Beijing. One is the issue of wiretapping. According to the European edition of the political news website Politico, an EU official said the president of the European Council would return to Europe a day early during the China-EU summit, in part because he didn't have a secure phone line in Beijing and couldn't talk to EU leaders without being monitored by Beijing authorities. In response, a spokesman for the Chinese Foreign Ministry said at a regular press conference the same day that it isn't China that is wiretapping and stealing secrets from the leaders of the EU countries and EU institutions. It should be noted that rumors of the CCP wiretapping foreign dignitaries have long been known to the outside world. For example, at the G7 summit in June 2021, there was news that British hosts cut off all internet and Wi-Fi links around the room where the leaders were meeting, leaving them disconnected from the outside world. Some Chinese netizens have also revealed the CCP's operating tactics. The CCP has a specialized department and team for intelligence gathering on every foreign dignitary, collecting identical replacements for the target's clothing, food, accommodation, transportation, and daily necessities, especially items worn and used, and then, if possible, replacing the items in order to swap or steal the secrets. The second piece of bad news for Beijing is that prior to the China-EU summit on December 6, Reuters reported that 2 government sources said Italy had told China it would withdraw from the Belt and Road Initiative. According to Bloomberg, Italy's foreign minister said the deal hasn't had the desired effect and is no longer a priority. He added that countries that didn't join the agreement had gotten better results. The Italian government statement put an end to months of speculation. Italy's decision certainly angered Beijing. However, the Chinese side didn't cover the humiliating news with much fanfare, but only expressed strong dissatisfaction as usual, which is natural. China firmly opposes smearing and undermining cooperation in developing the Belt and Road Initiative and opposes confrontation and creating division among the camps. Beijing aims to expand its influence in global economic and foreign affairs through the Belt and Road Initiative, which Xi Jinping called the project of the century. Italy has until December 2023 to make a formal request, otherwise the agreement signed between Italy and China in 2019 will be automatically renewed for another 5 years. Diplomatic circles speculated that Washington had pressured Italians to withdraw from the Belt and Road Initiative. However, the trouble facing this mega project, which totals more than $1 trillion, is not just about Italy's withdrawal, as many other member states consider the project to be a heavy burden rather than a benefit. Under the One Belt, One Road framework, Chinese state-owned banks will be responsible for arranging financing for the project, and Chinese contractors will undertake the construction of the project and manage it after its completion. If the host country can't repay the loan, the project will go to the Chinese side. Regardless of the arrangement, the CCP government will have significant influence and control over the participating countries. Since Xi Jinping came to power in 2012, the CCP has provided such loans totaling more than 1 trillion to about 150 countries, making China the world's largest government creditor. World Bank economists estimate that about 60% of Belt and Road loans go to countries in economic crisis. Given that China's state-owned banks are now facing massive defaults by domestic real estate developers such as Evergrande, Beijing has realized that it can't afford the burden of the Belt and Road any more than the debtor countries that borrowed from it. Losing Italy will be a particularly big blow to the project, as it loses the only member of the G7 whose withdrawal would greatly diminish the initiative and highlights the dilemmas that the CCP and its borrowers are facing. The CCP authorities are in dire need of support from European politicians at the moment. The US-China relationship is difficult to improve, and the US has stepped up its efforts to reorganize its supply chain to exclude the CCP's participation and keep raising its technological embargo. As a result, the CCP desperately needs to seek a way out in Europe. Perhaps this is why during Xi's meetings with senior EU officials, he could clearly sense his reluctance to decouple. One could even describe it as a gesture of retaining Europe yet not showing weakness. China-EU relations have shown a good momentum of consolidation and development, which is in line with the interests of both sides and the expectations of the people. The two sides should work together to maintain the momentum of the development of China-EU relations. China and the EU have the responsibility to work together to provide more stability for the world, more impetus for development, and more guidance and support for global governance. The CCP leader appealed to EU leaders that China and the EU should be mutually beneficial partners and continuously enhance political mutual trust. China and the EU should be partners in mutually beneficial cooperation, continuously enhance political mutual trust, build strategic consensus, consolidate ties of interest, eliminate all kinds of interference, and strengthen dialogue and cooperation for the benefit of the two peoples. We should jointly tackle global challenges and work together to promote world stability and prosperity. In 1995, when the European Commission issued its first policy paper on China, it brought a 10-year honeymoon period in Europe-China relations. The outbreak of the epidemic in 2020 had a major impact on the world's political landscape and on Europe-China relations. Since the lifting of border restrictions on the outbreak in early 2023, the CCP has been actively drawing in the West and interacting with it in the face of a weak economic recovery domestically. Several EU commissioners visited Beijing earlier this year, including the EU's trade and climate chiefs, but little progress was made in addressing the core issues of the relationship. Not only has there been no progress, but in the process the EU has gradually lost trust in the CCP, to the point that it has even issued a number of tough statements. On September 13, 2023, the European Commission launched an investigation into China's subsidization of electric vehicles. In terms of scale, this is likely to be the largest investigation in European history. Other investigations are likely to follow, such as an investigation into wind turbines. The rapidly developed trade and economic relations have long been the driving force and lubricant of the bilateral relationship between China and the EU. In 2003, when China and the EU formally established a comprehensive strategic partnership, the trade in goods between China and the EU exceeded 125 billion. In 2013, it exceeded 500 billion, more than quadrupling in a decade. Between 2019 to 2022, China-EU trade in goods grew from 559.6 billion euros to 856.3 billion euros. with an average annual growth rate of 15.23%, including a high growth rate of 22.8% in 2022. However, a reversal occurred in 2023. Now, major problems have surfaced. The French newspaper Le Monde reported a shocking figure that has been haunting Europeans for months. 400 billion euros, the all-time high of the EU's trade deficit with China in 2022. In 2019, the EU's trade deficit with China was just 180 billion euros. On November 16, 2023, EU Commission President von der Leyen criticized the EU's 400 billion euro trade deficit with China, saying that it was the result of massive government subsidies and industrial access capacity in certain sectors. In fact, as early as 2010, Europe's solar panel industry was devastated by the import of cheap Chinese panels. It can be said that trade and commerce that used to be the ballast rock of Sino-European relations has changed to be a trigger fuse.
We will discuss how to rebalance our economic relationship. China is the EU's most important trading partner, but there are clear imbalances and differences that we must address. We both recognize the importance of de-risking and strengthening the resilience of our economies.
We like competition. It makes us better. It lowers prices. It's good for the consumers. But competition needs to be fair. We insist on fair competition within the single market. Therefore, we also insist on fair competition from companies that come to our single market.
So, will Beijing face up to the demands from European countries? The European Commission's investigation lacks sufficient evidence and is deemed a typical act of trade protectionism. It has not only faced strong opposition from China, but also been questioned by various EU member states and businesses, with critics believing that protectionist measures will only backfire. China believes that this anti-subsidy investigation goes against the interests of both the Chinese and European automotive industries. It significantly disrupts and distorts the global automotive supply chain, including the EU's. And it hampers the efforts of China and the EU, or even the world, to address climate change. It will also have a negative impact on China-EU economic and trade relations. In addition, the Russia-Ukraine war has always been a central issue for European security. The EU is disturbed by the fact that China is covertly supporting Russia, thereby weakening Western sanctions against Moscow. The CCP is secretly supporting Russia's war in Ukraine by purchasing large quantities of Russian energy and raw materials, as well as offering Russia with all kinds of supplies. China's foreign ministry statement made no mention of the EU's continued warnings to Beijing, saying only vaguely that it was pushing for a solution to the Ukrainian issue. Compared with complicated economic and trade difficulties between China and Europe, the Russia-Ukraine war issue is currently the most direct and obvious contradiction between the two sides. As it is a matter of European security, it's difficult for the two sides to reconcile their positions.
We have a shared interest in peace and security, in the effective functioning of the rules-based international order, and to find solutions to global challenges. And this is why it is essential to put an end to the Russian aggression against Ukraine and establish a just and lasting peace consistent with the UN Charter. And in the same vein, to do everything possible to work for a two-state solution in the Middle East.
Apart from that, the EU is also concerned about the Taiwan Strait issue.
Nous sommes aussi attentifs à la situation en Asie.
We are also mindful of the situation in Asia. We are worried about the increasing tensions in the Strait of Taiwan and the South China Sea. As you know, we oppose any unilateral attempt to modify the status quo by force or coercion. We continue, however, to recognize the One China policy. As for the Middle East, the Beijing government has so far failed to condemn the terrorist attacks launched by Hamas and has never supported Israel in self-defense. In fact, Beijing has been urging Israel to withdraw its troops. It can be said that the positions of China and Europe are in stark opposition to each other. The humanitarian situation in Gaza is disastrous. We want to engage ourselves to bring humanitarian support and promote a political solution of peace based on two states. Peace and stability are important everywhere. I hope that we can cooperate to encourage Iran and the Houthis to not trigger a regional escalation. As usual, when talking about the Taiwan issue, the CCP often claims that it's China's internal affair, and foreign forces cannot cross this red line, and so on. Similar to the Taiwan issue, the CCP also has its own rhetoric on the Middle East, such as standing by the Palestinian people. However, this time the Chinese Foreign Ministry's announcement made no mention of this issue, nor did it make similar claims. Regarding the three regional issues raised by the EU, they were only mentioned together in a single sentence, stating that China would promote the resolution of hotspot issues in the region, such as Ukraine and the Middle East, which can be viewed as a softening of the CCP's stance. After the China-EU summit, the EU issued a statement of engaging to promote our values and defend our interests. The statement covers topics such as strategy and foreign policy, human rights, trade and economy, climate and environment, and digital issues. The statement said the summit demonstrates the EU's commitment to engage with China, but the EU highlighted the need for concrete progress following these discussions. As it can be seen, the EU hinted that the China-EU summit didn't produce concrete results, but only exchanged ideas. There was also no joint statement from both sides, not to mention a joint press conference. Judging from the results, the summit should be the same as the meeting between Biden and Xi, with little results. Both sides reached no meaningful consensus. Facing both domestic and external difficulties, does the CCP have any solutions? On the same day that the CCP was dealing with Italy and the EU on December 7th, Xinhua news agency published an article titled, "Smoothing the Domestic Great Circulation, one of the first-line observations on China's high-quality economic development in 2023. According to the article, in Xi Jinping's report to the 20th National Congress, it was proposed to enhance the power and reliability of the Great Domestic Cycle. So far this year, China's economy has been based on a large domestic market, and the certainty of China's own development has been a hedge against the uncertainty of the external environment. The huge potential of the Great Domestic Cycle will be further unleashed." The CCP itself knows that internal cycle or market is just an empty phrase, otherwise why would it try to curry favor with the West? The article serves only to stabilize the current situation. Now that the CCP is gradually losing the American market, it urgently needs to secure the European market, or else China's economy is likely to slip further. In this EU-China leaders meeting, while mutually recognizing each other as the main economic partner, the EU emphasized a few things to the CCP. First, the importance of achieving a more balanced economic relationship with a level playing field and in a mutually beneficial way. Second, the EU expects the Chinese side to take more concrete actions to improve the market access and investment environment for the EU's investors and exporters. Third, the EU aims to fully comply with the rules of the World Trade Organization and to build resilience by addressing key dependencies in specific sectors. Based on the track record of China's economic development over the past 30 years or so, isn't it a stretch to expect the Beijing government to behave in accordance with what was put forth?